Good evening, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the next edition of our Alumni Cast. Uh, Alumni Cast, I think we started during the COVID just to bring the connectivity between the students, faculty, and the broader alumni network. So far, we have conducted more than 15 sessions. And in this year, in 2021 alone, we have done, I think this is going to be our fourth session, if I'm right. We had, Sana Reddy speaking. Then last week we had Sita Raman from 84 batch. Then we also have Narendran, CEO, Managing Director of Tata Steels. So we have two formats in Alumni Cast. One is called the chat series. The other one is called the talk series. And I'm happy to launch the talk series of 2021 with today's speaker, GOPI KALLAYIL. So before we give the introduction and the backdrop about GOPI, a few house rules I wanted to share with you. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone for donating towards the recalc cash. A lot of action happening, and we are working with the institute to get the necessary things done for the students, faculty. So that is going on. The second thing, we recently launched our alumni portal. I request each and every one of you to just, reach out to your batchmates and friends to get registered. It just takes 2 minutes. It just takes 2 minutes to register. In that way, I think our future, connectivity and the celebration and the collaborative platform is going to be that portal. Please, so we have spent a lot of money. So I want that, just money to put in use. So that's the second thing. And the third thing, right, I think participating in sessions like this, getting a time from whether it is Narendran or Mr. Sana Reddy or from GOPI KALLAYIL, it's not an easy task. I mean, everyone is quite busy in their schedule. So we need to show support and strength, support in numbers. So hence, if you are watching this, please ask your friends, classmates, just send it to your personal groups, ask them to join. It's just one click. It's a one click away to join. Please join. So with that said, so please register in your portal and please, I think, join in future sessions because we have a very good lineup. We are talking to some of the celebrity folks from our campus, which we will announce in the coming months. So with that said, I will pass on the baton to Mali, Recall India President, to give introduction about GOPI and get this interesting session, Innovating the Google Way, started. Mali, over to you.
Yeah. Good evening, good morning to everyone. It's a very strange feeling introducing GOPI to the audience here. I hardly call him GOPI. We call him Gabs. All of us in our batch call him Gabs. But there are more problems, actually. Knowing somebody so well, you're biased towards him either way. Okay, so I'm going to be very positively biased for this evening. And there's so many nice things about GOPI to talk about. So now, as far as GOPI goes, it's really a question of where do I begin and where do I end. The first two memories of GOPI stand out in my mind before I get on to the formal introduction of, I won't even got formal introduction of GOPI, is my first close interaction with GOPI when GOPI and I used to co-edit a hostel magazine called The Wallpaper in those days. Okay, none of the digital times. It was, used to write something and GOPI had a better handwriting than mine and used to make some nice colors you could use, and we could write it on a chart paper and put it on the wall of the Diamond hostel lobby, so to say. And something we wrote and somebody didn't like, and they kind of tore it apart and burnt it. And we put it up again the next day saying, it's like the phoenix rising from the ashes. I don't know, GOPI, if you remember that. Okay, yeah. So the second memory of GOPI is that I went to IIM Calcutta right from college. He joined there a little later. GOPI has always been a different kind of person. If you entered his hostel room in Calcutta, he had his own footprints on the ceiling. I don't know how he managed it, whether he stood upside down and did that. I still don't know. He hasn't revealed the secret to me. So what I'm trying to say is GOPI has been a unique kind of guy all his life. Very, very different and not the normal kind of guy. Now on to the facts about GOPI. I think a lot of you would have read him about LinkedIn, but I'll add a little more color and flavor to what you would have read. Is okay. Blue chip educational background, blue chip starting from NIT Trichy, REC Trichy, then going on to IIM Calcutta. I'm being a little modest saying all this. But he beat me there and went on to Wharton, and then from there to Wharton to McKinsey, and from McKinsey to Google now. I think that's an aspiration most of us would take, and all students on this call would love to have. Basically, I think it's a fantastic resume, so to say. But for all that, Gopi wasn't that kind of nerdy kind of academic student at all. See, if you actually, my impression about Gopi changed a lot when I visited him a few years back at the Google headquarters. He welcomed me to an office which for me was straight out of science fiction. There were some 17, 18 steps on which the search volumes for which brand and which name was the highest for the day. And right on top, sitting on top of the Gopi, consulting all the leading international brands on how to handle their internet strategy and increase their internet presence and search volumes, etc. So, and we came out of the room and somebody was discussing a yoga session with Gopi. Gopi is many things rolled into one. He's a Googler, he's a yoga instructor, he's a Kirtan music creator. He's had the audacity he's spoken with me and said he's going to nominate one of his numbers for the Grammys. He was submitted. Did you, Gopi? You submitted for the Grammys. And he's a very, very well-known Toastmaster speaker. He's been in the top 10 for a couple of years. Gopi, you were a semi-finalist once, if I remember right. Is that right? So Gopi goes well beyond Google.
2018.
Yeah. So if you actually do a good Google search of Gopi, you'll find many parts to the personality. Many parts to the personality. I should say, I've never said this before. I think Narendran mentioned it last time that I've said so many nice things about it in 5 minutes. I've never said this before, but I think all of us in our batch, and I particularly feel very proud to say Gopi is our friend. Gopi will say different things after the meeting anyway, don't worry, okay. So it's really nice to have Gopi on the show, but one lasting impression of Gopi was, and I think it's true of many of us at REC and NIT today, is I had gone to visit him after his father's passing away, I think a couple of years back. I think the year was 2018, I think. I had gone to see him and we were walking around the fields there, and he's a boy from near Tiruchur. I don't know, I'm not able to pronounce the exact name of the place, otherwise I'd have. So, and he said most of his life there in Trivandrum, and for many of us, what we discussed and kind of agreed on was that many of us came from very diverse backgrounds, and REC is the place which kind of synthesized many things in us and transformed us to take on the world in many forms. And a lot of us, I think here, either students or the hostel life, the networks we make, the friends we made, the diversity of people we meet, and the sheer experience of cultural and intellectual experience of this was truly transformative. I think on that very, very proud Rectian stroke NITTN note, I present you my classmate and dear friend, chief evangelist for digital and whatever, Gopi, I don't know the full designation, but presenting Gopi, dear friend and Google hotshot. Gopi, to you, all you guys. Bye.
Thank you so much, Mali. Thank you. It's a pleasure, privilege, and honor to be back in a virtual fashion speaking to the REC alumni group. And so thank you for having me here. I would say that 41 years after graduating, my foundational level of confidence in a professional setting and personal settings came from those formative years in REC. If I were to reflect back on what did I take away, after 41 years, because if you look at the core technologies that I studied at REC versus what is now available in the world, both in the world of technology and world of business, it is vastly different. And yet there are some foundational skills I picked up. And there are 3 that I want to talk about that REC gave me back in those days, thanks to all these friends that I'm now talking to on this video conference. The first is the ability to take complex problems, break it down into component parts, and be able to solve them. It doesn't matter what the problem is, we can deconstruct it and solve it. That basic problem-solving technique is something that I inherited from REC. The second is symbolic logic, to be able to deduce from facts and logical deductions and come to a solution. So symbolic logic was one of the foundational skills. And the third, most importantly, was emotional quotient. I think we might not have attended classes and studied too much in engineering, but we learn how to deal with people. We learn how to communicate confidently. We learn how to turn on our own individual personas and charismas, and that has held me in good stead in all these years. So I am very grateful all these years later for that foundational skills that REC gave me. But today, Mali asked me to speak about what drives innovation at Google, and this is what I want to talk to you about, because Google is only a 23-year-old company and has led enormous waves of innovation along the years, and everyone is fascinated and curious about what drives innovation at Google. Now, there are 9 core principles. A few years ago, we sat and codified it, a group of us, when we realized that across all different product groups, there seems to be some consistent practices that Google has. And when we first sat down, there were about 26 we looked at, and then we distilled it down to 9. For the sake of time today, I will probably talk about 5 or so, just to give you a flavor of how we think at Google. Let me present here something in a minute. All right, here we go. Mali, are the slides visible? And then I'll get started.
Yeah, visible. Go ahead.
Right. Keep going.
Thank you. But before I even start talking about the principles of innovation at Google, one of the things that I want to talk about is where Google started. This was the world headquarters of Google in 1998. This garage in Menlo Park, California, only about 10 kilometers from where I live now, and I drive past it occasionally, is where it all began. And if you had opened that garage and walked in, this is what you'd have found it. Larry Page and Sergey Brin, the Google founders, sitting at what was then the engineering center, the development center, the sales office, the corporate boardroom, all bundled into one. And this garage, interestingly, the whole house belonged to my first manager at Google, who at that time was working with another company, and she had rented the garage out to these 2 Stanford PhD students because she wanted to make a little extra money. And several years later, she realized these kids were on to something, asked them if she could go to work for them, and they hired her. So we have the unique distinction of hiring our first landlady to be an employee of the company. And the landlady has gone on to do extremely well. She is now the CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki. And when I joined Google, I briefly worked for her as well. But back then, if you had gone into this world headquarters of Google and looked at the first Google product, it looked like this. It was a very simple concept, a web page, a white box, and all it could do was one thing. You typed in a word or phrase, it gave you a list of web pages that had the same word or phrase. Rudimentary by today's standards, but considered magical back then. And it could only do in the English language. It was only used by a few thousand people around the Palo Alto office. And if you look at the design of the web page, many of you are graphic design experts, you would rate the quality of this website as very low. And that's because our founder, Sergey Brin, designed it himself. And in his defense, Sergey says to this day, look, I didn't have HTML skills. Larry asked me to make up something, and this was the best I could come up with. But fast forward now 23 years later, that same simple white box has transitioned to look like this, a lot more cleaner. If at all anything, a lot of things seem to have been taken away from that web page. And all we've added is a blinking cursor and a microphone symbol. Now, you might think like nothing much has changed in all these years. The product looks quite the same. But what has changed is the sophistication of this product has changed enormously. You can talk to it. It understands context. If you say Taj Mahal, depending on the context in which you ask, it knows if you're talking about the monument or about a restaurant near your house or about the musician. And it can have complete conversations where you can ask things like, what is Picasso's full name, and try that voice search sometime and see how it lists all the 26 names in the Spanish language that that Picasso's ancestors were named after. So it does a lot of brilliant things. But not only that is just one product search. If you look beyond that, in the same 23 years, Google has gone on to create 9 products, which you'd all recognize from the icons, that have at least 1 billion people using once a month. That is sort of a metric for success. Do 1 billion people use it at least twice a day? And if you look at all these products, Chrome, YouTube, Android, Google Photos, Maps, etc., you'd see that there's been enormous waves of success along the way. This is well and good. So at this point, you could stop and say, wow, this is a lot of innovation. This is a lot of success. But what is not commonly understood is that to get to these 9 products that are used by at least 1 billion people, the company had to go through thousands of products that failed. So what you're looking at is a digital graveyard of products that Google tried to create and that didn't see the light of the day. At some point, they were retired. And this is just a very partial list. There are several here that I worked on. And everyone at Google, if you have a long career, it is guaranteed that it is checkered with a lot of failures. And that's one of the dirty little secrets of innovation at Google. We fail far more than we succeed. We have the understanding that we have to fail many times before we get one massive success, before one of the products go on to be used by 1 billion people. So I'll talk about those failure principles in a minute, but this is sort of the initial context. And with that, I want to start talking of what these core principles are. As I mentioned, I'll talk about 5 of those principles, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So the first of those innovation principle is this notion that innovation can come from anywhere and from anybody. What does this mean? Now, in many organizations, innovation is confined, or at least sits in a specialized way in one organization that is called the innovation department. And usually they have a chief innovation officer. 3M has one, GE has one, Nike has one. But at Google, there is nobody. And that's a little puzzling. And often we are asked this question, how come in a company that is known for innovation, nobody seems to be responsible for innovation? But that's because the founders, Larry and Sergey, right from the first day mandated that everybody is in charge of innovation. So even though I don't directly sit in the Inch department, I have a responsibility for innovation. One of my colleagues, TT, is on the call. He works on Android technology partnerships globally. He and his organization are expected to drive innovation as well. So when you empower people with that level of expectation and responsibility to innovate, they do amazing things with it. Let me tell you one story. It's a story of a friend of mine, Dmitry Kanavesky, who works at Google. And here in the picture, you can see him with his granddaughters. And Dmitry sits in the building across from me. Now, the one thing you have to know about Dmitry is he was born in Russia. And from the age of 1, he's been deaf, hard of hearing. So he has a hearing impairment. So if you want to communicate with Dmitry, the only way you can do it is tap him on the shoulder, and he'll signal to you saying, give me a minute. He goes on the internet, finds one of those interpreters for the hearing impaired, and a third person joins the conversation via the internet, and then you can have a conversation with Dmitry. But one of his colleagues, Chet, said, this is a lot of friction in having a meeting anytime you want to meet with Dmitry, and there must be a way to solve it. We have all these amazing technologies built into our phones and computers that can recognize voice, that can speak, that can imitate human voice. So we must have a way to solve it. And these guys went to solve the problem. And I'm intimately familiar with this because I became friends with Dmitry and Chet. And this is one of the pictures from the Google Cafe late at night where I'm discussing the solution that they built. And let me tell you what they went on to do just by themselves. They didn't wait for permission. They solved the problem themselves. So I'm going to play a video of Dmitry actually talking about how they solved the problem. Now, it might be hard to hear Dmitry, so read the closed captioning. And the reason that sometimes it's hard to understand Dmitry is, remember that he learned the English language not by listening to it because he can't hear it. They taught him in Russia so the English phonetic was taught to him using the Russian alphabet. So he pronounces words in a certain way, and there's no way to correct him because he can't hear a native language speaker. So if you can't understand him clearly, just follow the closed captioning at the bottom. Here's Dmitry telling about how they went on to build a solution.
I completely lost hearing when I was 1 year old. technology provides tremendous opportunities to help people with disabilities. I'm a research scientist at Google and developing speech recognition in technology. Speech recognition accuracy finally became so good that I could fulfill my dream for whole life to use speech recognition to communicate with people. Hello.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine. And how are you?
I'm doing good. What can I get you today?
I would like tea. Like Transcribe is an application that runs in Android. It provides transcription of speech for deaf and hard of hearing in real time.
Dimitri worked with the speech team to develop that technology, and Google has made strides in this in the past couple of years, but the app itself is what I've been working on. I'm not an Android engineer. I saw an opportunity for something useful and dug into that.
So as Chet says, he's not an Android engineer, but he saw an opportunity to do something useful and dug into it, and they went on to build the solution. Now there is a closing sequel to this story. You saw those pictures of Dimitri with his granddaughters in the first picture I showed you. They are 7. They live in Montreal, in Quebec, Canada. They speak 5 languages, but they have never been able to communicate with their grandfather because of his speaking, because of his hearing impediment. But thanks to this app, for the first time, they can now communicate directly. How sweet is that story? So this is a free app you can download. It's available on my phone. And the amazing thing is in the palm of my hands, I now have the ability to communicate freely and easily with the 466 million deaf people in the world in their language, because it's available in 50 different languages. I can use it in Malayalam, Tamil, Telugu, Gujarati, etc. So give it a try. Live Transcribe is the app. But the main point I wanted to make is these 2 gentlemen, along with the others that they collaborated with, took it upon themselves and created this incredible solution and drove another wave of innovation that now liberates the 466 million deaf people in the world to be able to interact with everyone, with all of us. The second innovation principle I want to talk about, oh, not this one. Hold on a second. It's a concept called Think 10x. And the idea being, and this is one of the mantras that Larry drilled into us, in that coming into work every single day, don't think of improving your product or service by just 10%, but try to ask the question, how can I make it 10 times better? So what is the difference? If you only try...
जैसे जो भी चीज था मेरा उसमें बहुत सारा चीज का इंटरेस्ट नहीं था।
वाणी
फर्स्ट हैंड देना था। अगर तुम बोलेगा प्लस वाला तो हम वो सबको यही बोलेंगे कि हमको नहीं सीखना था।
Just 1 second.
SK, can you shut off your mic?
Go ahead, Gopi. Sorry, go ahead.
No worries. Okay. So the idea of Think 10x is don't just improve your product or service by 10%, because if you're only increasing it by 10%, you think you're making progress, but it tends to be incremental improvement. You just make the car go a little faster. You make your car run a little extra on a gallon of gas. But when you ask the question, how do I make it 10 times faster, 10 times cheaper, 10 times better? It forces you to go out of incremental innovation to breakthrough innovation. Your brain has to work in very different ways. So this is the challenge that we are given at Google. This is one of the core innovation principles. Anything that you work on, try to ask the question, how can it transform something in the world at a 10x pace, not just a 10% pace? So let me give you an example of how 10x thinking works at Google. 3 things have to come together for 10x thinking. And the 3 things are, we look at a very big problem out there in the human condition that has not been solved. It doesn't matter how big it is, but we look at something very big. It could be climate, it could be energy usage, it could be a healthcare problem. And then we imagine radical solutions. When I say radical, it has to borderline be almost lunatic. The idea being you let your mind go wildly imaginative, the way children imagine solutions to different problems, and let the brain go off in different directions. And that's by design, so that we don't get confined to the way we think now, confined to the way we solve problems now. But then that is impractical. So to bring it down to practical levels, we ask the question, are there some breakthrough technologies that can take this crazy, wild as almost lunatic solutions and bring it down to ground and bring it to practical implementation? So how does it all work? Let me give you the example of how one of the teams at Google thought of 10x thinking. So here's the big problem. When you order a package today using any online delivery site, the package that arrives to your door, how much does it weigh? Think about that. Probably a kilo, maybe 2 kilos, 3 kilos. But when you look at the machine that brings it to your door, the delivery truck, that delivery truck is about 15,000 kilos. So that seems to be inefficient that we're moving these 1 or 2 kilo packages using 15,000 kilo machines, and that clog up the traffic on the street and create all kinds of problems. So the radical solution that team talked about is what if we were able to transport that 1 kilo package using a very, very, very lightweight device and transported by air. So that is the radical solution they started trying to work with. And in some sort of, and the breakthrough technology was, they said there are some solutions available. There are drone technologies, but there's a lot of impractical things around it. The range that they can cover. Can they work in cold weather conditions? Can they cover vast rural areas? And how do you bring the drone back safely? Make sure that there are no accidents along the way. So many things to solve for. So this is what we are working on currently. And I want to show you one of the prototypes being tested in a rural farm in Australia. This project is called Project Wing at Google. And the idea is let's use very lightweight drones to deliver packages aerially. And as part of the experiment, we are even asking the questions like, if somebody, say Sridhar or Naveen, were to order a burrito, can it be delivered from the restaurant that made it to them, even as it is sizzling hot, so it doesn't lose its temperature, and it's delicious when it arrives as well. So here is a short video explaining how that test is currently working. And this is in Australia. Again, if you can't listen to the audio, watch the closed captioning.
Yeah, hi, Nick. This is Neil Parford at Barmax Homes here. Could I order some dog food for my dogs, please?
Throughout history, there have been a series of innovations that have each taken a huge chunk out of the friction of moving things around. Project Wing aspires to take another big chunk of the remaining friction out of moving things around in the world. We're in Australia. The goal of being here is to show that the hard work over the last 2 years has resulted in a reliable system that can do autonomous delivery. And we also really just want to get out and learn what it's like to actually deliver to the neighbor meal and see what it's like from their perspective. It's years from a product, but it is sort of the first prototype that we want to stand behind.
So the dog finally got its dog food. It was aerial delivered by a drone. And this is an example of 10x thinking at work. And there are a number of things like that we've done, and the idea being think 10x, not 10%. Molly, it's 8:33. I'll go till 8:40 and then take
Keep going. It doesn't matter. 5 minutes doesn't matter, Gopi. Keep going.
Okay, good. The next concept I want to talk about is 20% time. And the idea behind which this was launched originally at Google was this. If you work in a research department, if you work in a PhD or a scientific environment, a university environment, you have a lot of free time to allow the mind to wander. You have a lot of academic and intellectual freedom to dream of big ideas. But the minute you go into a corporate environment, you're put in a slim lane and said, this is your project, this is your job, focus on it. And Larry and Sergey wanted to make sure that at Google, everybody had the freedom to work on things that they were passionate about, irrespective of what their core job was. So they introduced this concept originally of 20% time, where 20% of your time, 8 hours a week, you're free to work on whatever you want, depending on your passion. So, so Praveen, me, and Raja could be on 3 different teams, but we are passionate about, say, a life sciences problem. We could collaborate in the 20% time and work on try and solve the problem independently, even though we might be in completely different parts of the organization. And again, when you put that kind of a structure in place, it allows people to collaborate and do amazing things. So here's an example. There were 2 engineers at Google, David Coase and Damien Henry, who worked far away from the corporate headquarters. They were in Paris working on a project called the Google Arts and Culture Institute. And if you're not familiar with it, the Google Arts and Cultural Institute curates the best art in human civilization and culture, digitizes it so that you can enjoy it. So the idea being, let's say there's a 16-year-old sitting next to Nabeen in Kathmandu, Nepal, who's not able to travel to Amsterdam and see a Rodin sculpture at the museum there. That boy or girl can still experience the beauty of the Rodin sculpture using what Google Arts and Culture digitizes and puts it on the web. But everything that they were putting out at the time was in 2D. And this is when David and Damien asked the question, is there a way to give a 3D experience to our audience? So if the Rodin sculpture is there, is there a way you can actually walk around it and see it from all angles, even from the comfort of your house? So with that in mind, they set to work on it using 10x thinking and said, well, the solution is obviously virtual reality. But unfortunately, the virtual reality solutions at the time were $20,000 or so per unit and prohibitively expensive. So using 10x thinking, they asked the question, how can we make it 10 times cheaper, 100 times cheaper? What is the cheapest material available on the planet with which we can build some of the solution? And the answer was literally cardboard and plastic. Cardboard and plastic. So they said, let's see if we can build a virtual reality solution using just cardboard and plastic, which seems like a ludicrous idea because you are trying to build a very high-tech solution, and here you're showing up with incredibly cheap material like these little cardboard devices. But they were convinced that they could do it, and they went on to do it, and these are some of the prototypes they built, and eventually we built a solution called Google Cardboard for virtual reality. And what was the breakthrough technology that led them to take this radical idea and build it was the fact that they realized much of the capability of virtual reality is already available in your smartphone. So they said we can combine the smartphone that everybody carries in the pocket along with cardboard and plastic and build something. Now, when we build these things at Google, we often don't know what exactly to do with it. And we trust our end consumers will actually be more brilliant than us in solving the problem. So we put it in the hands, we ask them to work with it, and then they come back and tell us different solutions. So in this case, what we did is we took 2.3 million units of Google Cardboard and distributed it free to every subscriber of the New York Times. And the New York Times subscriber is a very intelligent, intellectual, widely dispersed group. There are lawyers and teachers and social scientists and PhDs and sportsmen and women in that audience. And all of these people with a diverse background would use it. And through that, we started figuring out different use cases and solutions. One of these units fell into the hands of a medical team in Florida. And that is when this device intersected the life of this baby Tegan Lexkin. So when baby Tegan was born, she had some severe health issues. Her heart was in the wrong place, and she had only one lung. And it is too fragile a situation to operate upon. So the doctors sent her home literally to die. But she had an aunt who refused to give up. She said, there must be some innovative surgeon somewhere who should be able to save my niece's life. So she started calling all of the top pediatric cardiologists in the country, and most of them threw their hands up and said, this is too delicate a situation. We won't be able to do anything to help you. Except for one team at the Miami General Nicholas Hospital, they said they might be able to do something. But they had one issue, they said, and that issue was the fact that they typically need to build a 3D model of the heart. And this is the head surgeon, Dr. James. And he said they need to build a 3D model of the heart, and the 3D printer was broken. The replacement unit would take a long time to come. So they were out of luck as well. And that's when a junior doctor on the team, Dr. Carlos Munoz, had received one of these Google Cardboard units. He brought it into the surgery room and said, we might be able to do something with it. I'm going to play video. Mali, I think we may need to mute one more person, just to work on it in the background. So I'll let the surgeons talk about what unfolded next using this simple, low-cost device that was in their hands.
Okay, it may not be the Oculus Rift, but a $20 cardboard contraption and a smartphone team up to save the life of a baby, and it's just one of the top stories across America. Tegan Lexon was born with only one lung and half a heart. She was declared inoperable until Miami doctors put photos of her heart into Google Cardboard.
I see the baby's heart. I see it in 3D. I can see it from the front to the back. I can see it from the top, and I can see it from the bottom.
The extra angles let doctors plan a surgery, and after a 7-hour operation, baby Tegan is expected to make a full recovery.
Minutes and millimeters make the difference between getting it right and getting it wrong. Once we saw these images, we said, wait a second, we can figure this out. I think this is the difference between her living.
So again, a great story where this concept, innovation principle called 20% leads to the creation of this astonishing device made just of cardboard and plastic, which then leads to somebody's life, a baby's life being saved. I'll just close up with one last principle and then turn it over to Q&A. And the final most important principle, this is the story that I forgot the sequel. Baby Tegan survived. Here you can see with her twin sister who didn't have any health issues. So she's gone on to lead a healthy life since that story unfolded. The last principle I want to talk about is have a mission that matters, have a deep sense of purpose. And this is probably the most important purpose in Google, the most important innovation principle in Google. So when Google was started, the founders came up with the core mission of Google in 10 elegant words. And those 10 elegant words were this: organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. Organize the world's information, make it universally accessible and useful. And those simple 10 words give the entire company a sense of purpose and mission. So if you ask TT, he will tell you what drives him and what is his sense of purpose within his own operating unit. And over the years, our mission has expanded a little bit more, the type of areas we get into a lot more. So more recently, a second sentence has been added to this and led by Sundar, he and the team coined it. So our mission is expanded beyond that first sentence to now saying this: we want to build a more helpful Google for everyone to increase 4 things in the world. The 4 things being knowledge, success, health, and happiness. Knowledge, success, health, and happiness. Now, these are very far-reaching, profound mission statements. What does it mean? What's fascinating I've seen at Google in my time here is that everybody takes it, adopts it, and makes it their own personal mission statement. And they have a personal view of the world that energizes them, that makes them want to come and do amazing things every single day. So if you were to turn around and ask me, what is it, my version of the mission statement, what gives me personal sense of mission and purpose? I want to close up by telling you a personal story of my own roots, which go back to this tiny rice farming village called Chittilanjeri. It's in Palghat district in Kerala. And if you had gone to the village many, many years ago, you'd have met my grandparents, who were very poor rice farmers in this little village. And this is where my parents also grew up as the children of 2 poor rice farming families. And they grew up very modestly. They didn't have much, like many people on this call. You know, your parents or grandparents would have lived. I know a lot of REC students come from fairly modest background, and REC is the institute that gives us the breakthrough to then have social mobility. So my parents grew up with a modest background as well. They grew up without electricity. They grew up without running water. They never got a college education. I was the first in my family to go to a professional college. In the entire set of extended cousins, etc., I was the first one to get a degree in engineering. And if you go back to that village, but my parents had aspirations for their children, like parents all over India have. And thanks to those aspirations, me and my siblings, that is me and my 3 siblings, between us, we got on to get 10 advanced degrees, 10. And often I'm asked this question here in the US, what caused that kind of social mobility in one generation? It is simply access to information. But back then, it was very slow access. I still remember, and Mali, TT, Sridhar, and many of our friends in the call will remember, I had to take an 8-hour train journey from Trichy to Chennai on the Rockford Express, so that the next morning I could sit at the USIS library and look at a list of graduate schools to apply to. 8-hour train journey. Today, we pick up our phones, and if it takes 8 seconds, it frustrates us. But it's still, even though there's slow access to information, I had some access to information, and that was what propelled me forward. That is what propelled the family forward. But today, when I go back to the village, as I do every year, and I look at the school where my mother studied, it looks like any other rural Kerala school, very modest at best. Physically, nothing seems to have changed. But one thing that has changed is that if you look into the classroom, kids in that school with access to digital technology, the kind of work we do at Google, now have access to the same amount of information as somebody who goes to NIT, as somebody who goes to IIM, as somebody who goes to Stanford. In an era where information is like oxygen, we are leveling the playing field for humanity. In an era where information is like oxygen, we are leveling the playing field for humanity. And that, to me, is what drives my primary sense of purpose, why 15 years later, after joining what was then a small $6 billion company, and now working for what is a much more larger $220 billion company, I'm still energized every single day to try and solve this problem. Difference. With that, let me close this off and take your questions. Thank you, Mali. Thank you, Raja, for hosting me.
Okay, so
Mali, Raja, the request for more principles for innovation separately. Do we have time for 1 or 2 more for Gopi to go, or should we go to Q&A?
No, that's what I was about to say. That so Gopi, I think we talked about innovation. Innovation comes from anyone, and think 10x. That's your second principle. Then 20% time. I think you missed the fail well. Maybe if you could address the fail well a little bit, and then maybe out of the 9, at least you can cover 5. You talked about have a mission that matters. On the fail well, if you could just give some high-level thoughts, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. Now, we all come from a culture where there's a lot of stigma associated with failure. It's not. We don't think of failure as a badge of honor, and we don't want to fail. We want to save face and somehow get some level of success. But at Google, there is an intrinsic recognition that we fail a lot. And I showed you one of the pictures, the graveyard of failures. We celebrate failures. Even though we have 9 products that 1 billion people use, we probably have like 1,000 products we have total maybe 9,000 projects we might have tried where we failed a lot. My resume at Google is littered with failure. The thing at Google, we acknowledge that as part of our success. We never think of it as a failure. We tried something, we learned something, we morph from that into something else. Let me give you an example. 4 years of my career, I spent on a product called Google+. It was our 4th effort at the time to make a dent in the world of social media. And at some point, the product was retired. You could say, hey, the project failed. What happened to all of the people? Now, none of us got fired. I'm still here flourishing at Google. I moved on to do other things. But we don't think of it as a failure. We morph from that experience into something else. There are 2 amazing things that have come out of Google+. One is Google Photos, which is originally part of Google+, and that's become a 1 billion user product. The second one that came is Google Meet. Google Meet was originally part of Google. It is originally part of Google Plus as Google Hangouts, and during the
hey guys, go on.
Vani, mute everybody. Vani, mute everybody.
Mute everybody and unmute only Gopi.
Okay, so all right. Yeah, Google Plus. I said Google Meet was, again, it came out of Google Plus. So we celebrate failure. We have a Day of the Dead. Once a year, we bring out all of the failed projects, and we have like a celebration, like any other celebration, like the Day of the Dead in Mexican culture. The teams that worked on the failed projects get up on the main stage in front of all hands. We do a complete postmortem. And also the engineers who worked on those projects are hired by other teams. They're considered more valuable. So for example, Raja worked on a project that failed, the idea being that Raja knows something about what works and what does not work. And therefore, he's considered extra valuable and extra mature and knowledgeable. So that's how we embrace failure and we celebrate failure. And it's because of all these failures that we are able to showcase this level of success. One more thing, every quarter when we get our quarterly evaluation, we are supposed to discuss with our managers and show a lot. We discussed all the things we succeeded in, but we are also supposed to discuss a lot of failures, because the idea being, if you didn't fail a few times during the quarter, if you didn't fail in a big way, it means you're not thinking big enough, you're not taking risks, you're not being adventurous enough. So Google has a very different cultural approach to failure, and that allows us to succeed on this scale.
Great.
Thanks,
thanks, Gopi. I think with the time what we got, I think we should have one more session. That's what I think in the chat.
Gopi, there's a lot of demand for one more session for the remaining principles.
We will plan, because you said 9 and you suddenly you abruptly ended with 4 and 5. We would love to hear the remaining 4, but we will plan for that. But
he said speak only for 30 minutes. You're asking me to speak about 23 years of the history. He said
I didn't say speak only for 30 minutes, but anyway, I think all of us think we'll be able to get more attention with 30 minutes than with 45 minutes. Raja, what do you say?
Yeah, definitely. And also, I think, we wanted to make it a little bit collaborative. That is why we said 30, Gopi. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think we can have one more session, definitely, at a suitable time. Now, I wanted to open the house for questions. I mean, there are a lot of questions that have already, I think that has hit my window. I'm going to talk about that. But before that, I wanted to start off with the way I think I understand, right? I think now let's take the Google Cardboard, right? When Cardboard came, I also received the Cardboard. In one of the conferences, it was given to us, tried with the smartphone, etc. Then the competition started coming with Facebook Ocular and Microsoft coming out with HoloLens. Now, coming back to, you said failure is one of the principles. You got to fail. But internally, when Google, goes back to the board, I mean, in the boardroom, how do you guys discuss and evaluate, hey, are we really, okay, we have created disruptive, innovatively, I think we have created this product, but is it paying money for me from a pure business context? Do you guys discuss that? Because in that way, Google came up with several products. It failed because the competition has already overtaken you guys. What is your thought from that perspective?
Well, I forgot to tell you, one of the principles I skipped, Raja, is focus on the user, and all else will, it's simply focus on the user. But the real full principle is focus on the user, all else will follow. And that's one of the early cultural principles that is established at Google, is that when we launch a product or area, we never ask the question, what is the business plan for this product? And therefore, I had to unlearn things I learned at Wharton. I had to unlearn things that I learned at McKinsey, because at Google, that is never the concept as to how much money the product will make. When we take a concept to, say, Larry and Sergey back then, when they were active with the company and present project idea, the question they would never ask is like, what is the cash flow going to be for this product? The question they ask is it solving a problem for hundreds of millions of users? If we build, they've always believed that if we built a useful product that hundreds of millions of users needed, then it would automatically, revenues and everything would eventually take care of itself. It might be sometime in the future, but otherwise we don't have to worry about it. Even now we introduce products. Look at Google Voice, Google Home Hub, where you can speak to a physical device in your kitchen counter and get your questions answered. Where are the ads in that product? There are no ads. That's a primary revenue source for search. So essentially we have cannibalized our primary revenue source. And but we're not afraid of launching a new product. And that's just the way the company thinks.
Okay, sounds good. So now, so folks, we will open the house for some questions. So this is what I'm going to do. There are certain questions I think which I will whatever that has come to me. And
Raja, one question I have whenever.
Why don't you start, Mali? Let me start with you. Why don't you go ahead? Yeah, please unmute.
Gopi, no, it's a question from all of us. How did your REC NIT experience, what did in that train you for what you have done and what you have done today, what you're doing today?
Sure. Yeah. I said that in the beginning, Mali, and so I'll repeat it again. I think the three things that I took away from the NIT experience was first is the ability, when we are in engineering school, we learn problem-solving ability. We can take a very complex problem, deconstruct in component parts, and tackle it. That's one of the skills I picked up. The second is the notion of symbolic logic, whereby you can deduct and argue your way through a particular set of facts, features, data points, etc. And no matter what obfuscated or complex situation is given to you, you can still arrive at certain logical conclusion by looking at its component parts. And the third is a high degree of emotional quotient. You might think all the time we spend in the hostel, we had to get along with and adapt and adjust and be resourceful among a very small community of our hostel mates and the rest of our batch mates and the other juniors and seniors. And we had a limited set of resources. I know now things might have changed dramatically. So it made us extremely savvy when it came to interacting with people and gave us a high degree of social and emotional skills. And that we've been able to carry forth and survive and operate.
Thanks, Gopi. Go ahead, Raja, please.
Okay, thanks. So here is a couple of, I think one of the students have asked this question, Gopi. So the question is, how to land into a product strategy role at Google, once maybe I think this person is asking the steps, I guess. How to land into a product strategy role at Google? Any tips for the students?
Sorry, I missed that word. How to run into the product strategy?
How to land.
Land.
Oh,
How do you arrive at?
Yeah.
How do you arrive at a product strategy at Google?
That's right.
Well, it starts off with there are a number of different. At this point, it's like a very large and complex company, and there are many, many different ways by which it can. But typically, the product strategy is driven by the product managers who act as the general manager of the product, and we don't necessarily do market survey because we often build products that do not exist or solve a problem that people are not even thinking of. So we have to imagine it. So we let often our own imagination come up with what is potentially a thing that we could solve for, and what are the technology that drive it. So we look at is there an existing data and technology based solution to a complex problem. So let me explain one such thing. So if you look at proteins are the fundamental building blocks in life, and proteins are nothing more than a sequence of amino acids, and they think of them like a mala bead, so they fold into a 3D pattern. Okay? So explaining something like in a very complex in biotech here in simple terms. So they crumple into like when you fold a garland around your neck. The 3D shape defines the function of the protein, and from that you can then predict what the protein will do in your body. But so far, only about 10% of all the proteins in the body have been codified. And this is where we said we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning to project the shape of a protein. And Google's artificial intelligence unit, DeepMind, went to work on it. And last year they announced they solved what is called the protein fold problem. The idea being from its genetic sequence, we can now accurately predict what is the 3D shape of the protein look like. So this is one of the things. You can say, what is the product strategy here? But we are thinking ahead and said, let's try to predict the shape of all the proteins out there in the human body, because that will be useful for biologists and medical professionals to then look into different parts of the human body and solve for diseases, etc. So often nobody asked for it. If you go and ask consumers, if you go and ask the professionals, they might not even say there's a demand for such a thing. So often we go on to build things like this in an anticipatory kind of way, or we put the solution much ahead of the problem and then test it out and then see if there's a demand and utility for it. If it is, we roll forward. If not, we roll back on it.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Gopi. So now I'm going to request, I think, if any of our faculty or professors are on this bridge to ask one question. Any professors, Anantaraman or anyone else who wanted to?
Professor Raman was there, Anantaraman was there.
Yes. Yeah. I will ask two questions. One, of course, I just want such talks to be organized for the benefit of student community. That's one request, not the question. The second thing is, do you think it's going to put a lot of pressure on teachers? Because the students come well informed to the class, and will it not add a lot of pressure to faculty, so that the students are going to be benefited, because some stress will be there on faculty. They can prepare well, go to the class with the latest things and impress the students.
Sure, it will, but it's a good pressure, I think. If both the students and the faculty are well informed, then it takes up the level of debate and discussion in the class. In general, our belief at Google is that it has made everyone smarter because everyone is now armed with so much more information. And if it brings that extra layer of deep knowledge into the classroom, we can only benefit. The faculty benefits, the students benefit, and the overall learning process benefits from that.
In fact, I had a similar experience. In the past decade, some of the students come well prepared to the class. That's a shift from the students' perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anantaraman, I should say, coming from me and Gopi, we attend a lot of classes on campus though.
Okay, sounds good. It's okay. Now the next question, I think any student, I'm going to pass it on to the students. I think there are several students, I think, witnessing this. Can anyone want to go? This is only for students. I'm giving the opportunity for them to ask the question. Okay, I think nobody wants to ask the question. Okay, does anyone wanted to go now? Please raise your hand.
Okay, now this is Srikanth from the batch of 91.
Yep.
Good session, great session, Gopi. Pleased meeting you. One thing that I would like to ask you is, in the current scenario of COVID or post-COVID extreme adaptation era, do you think, what is one or few things that you recommend, or you think that a company like Google, or for any company, innovation-minded company, be it startup or well-established, should embrace?
So let me make sure I understand the question. In the era of COVID, what should an innovation-minded company embrace?
In the current era of post-COVID extreme adaptation, where it is required, what are the few things that you think, in your opinion, that companies with innovation mindset should embrace?
Well, I would say three things, Srikanth. One is to expect the unexpected, because there's so much of unpredictability in the air. Second is to practice a concept I call nimbleosity, where you're extremely nimble and still move at high velocity. And then the third is then to have the courage and willingness to change your strategy on a dime, because you might go in one direction and realize that it is a completely wrong decision to make. And therefore you have to make a 180-degree turn and head in a different direction. I mean, I can only speak at it at a very general level. Those would be three principles that I think most companies have to embrace to be innovative. Beyond that, it has to depend on the specificity of the situation.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. So Gopi, there is one question on the window. I think this person, I heard the name, Kumar Gautam. He's from edutech background. He's saying, his question is wondering, like a YouTube music, is there a plan for YouTube education to get launched? Because 55% of the traffic on the YouTube is all about learning. Because
well, I would
now,
say YouTube education is already launched because we know people are using YouTube for education purposes. So already how-to videos, for example, I ask people like, how did you, and there was a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity of eating masala dosa from somebody who's not from the Indian culture. And he's like, yeah, I just learned it. And he's a monk actually in an ashram. And he said, yeah, I learned it on YouTube. Or people learn how to play the guitar and people learn languages. There is already, it is used as a platform for education informally. And formally also, there is a lot of organization. I mean, take Khan Academy, like one of the primary distributors, or look at all the educational institutions. They're putting the content out there and they're using YouTube as a platform to disseminate it. So I would say, in my opinion, YouTube is an education platform, in addition to being for entertainment and news, launched several years ago.
Okay, so let me just, we'll have 2 more questions and then I think, we will wrap it in the interest of time.
Sure.
So when, I think there are several products of Google that are available and that are given to both enterprise and also to the customers, right? Both B2B and B2C. So given that concept, does Google has a practice of measuring the value that the customer or a consumer has realized from its product? Is there a pattern that Google follows? Like, it could be a value management framework. Okay, I sold this product to the CIO or a CTO. Are they effectively using my product, or it is just okay, or the sales guy is just happy that they sold the product? Do you do some sort of a measurement?
Raja, can I add to your question before he answers, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
See, is Google a primarily retail consumer product, and how successful has Google been in the enterprise side of the business, GOPI? Adding to that question.
Sure, yeah. Well, Google has got many dimensions to it. It's not a simple answer. It's an extremely complex business. But a core part of Google, as people know and recognize it, is the consumer products. All the 9 products that I showed you with 1 billion users are used by consumers: Search, YouTube, Maps, Chrome, Android, etc. At the same time, Google also provides marketing services to lots of enterprises, and that's an enterprise side business. That's the side of the business I work. The last year, our annual run rate of revenues around upward of $200 billion. And all of that came from enterprises, small and big. And barely a small fraction came directly from consumers. For the most part, we don't charge consumers, right? So in that sense, Google caters to, this is what my day job is. I work with the largest brands and the largest companies in the world. There's a whole Google Cloud division that caters to enterprise as well. So there are many dimensions of the business. If you look at the team of people who work on Android, they work with all of the major telecom companies in the world, the phone manufacturers in the world. So it is a complex business that has a consumer side and has a business side as well. But to go back to Raja's question, in terms of value, I don't know whether he mentioned from a consumer perspective or from an enterprise perspective. So I will take it from a consumer perspective. The key criteria that Larry and Sergey laid out is any product that we build should pass what they call the toothbrush test. So let me explain the toothbrush test. If you think of the dentist who created the toothbrush sometime in the 14th century, he invented this astonishingly useful product that is indispensable to all of us. The whole world uses it. Every single human being uses it. We use it twice a day, and it does not require a user manual. Everyone in the world instinctively knows pretty much how to use a toothbrush, and maybe a dental assistant needs to give them a little guidance as to how to brush your teeth well. But minimal instructions across all cultures, across the world, an incredibly useful product was created. Similarly, from a consumer perspective, that's how we gauge value. Have we built a product? That's what Gmail does, Maps does, or Search, where consumers would want to use it at least twice a day and want to come back and use it over and over again. So if you look at something like Google Search, it's used about 150 billion times a month by humanity. That's roughly 75 times for every single human being on the planet, which means roughly 2 times a day, anyone on the internet conducts a search in 120 languages in 200 countries and territories. To us, that is a sign that we have created value. Otherwise, consumers won't come back and use the product over and over again.
Okay, great. Thanks, thanks, Gopi. Mr. Shanti Mohan, can you unmute your voice and go ahead with your question? Shanti Mohan.
Hello. Yeah. Mr. Gopi, are you sure that only those 9 products are most successful? Because okay, to mention, I use Google Drive and Google Fi also. Probably Google Fi is not very popular, but it's I feel it's very successful product, because when I go to India, I don't have to switch my provider, cell phone provider or anything like that. I can just use Google Fi even in India. It's not same charges. I don't get any surprises. Secondly, you said focus to the user. When you are focusing to the user, the main thing is customer service. I think Google is not having customer service like say Apple or Microsoft, because in those 2 companies, at least which I have experienced, that you can just call somebody and get a response. But I don't find such a service from Google, because at least for technical difficulties or technical service, customer service should be available. Is there anything like that available?
Yeah. So I'll answer the first question and I'll skip the second one because we are deviating away from the topic. Now let's stay focused on the innovation topic. The first question, I didn't say that these are the only successful products. I said these are 9 products that have 1 billion users. So there are hundreds of successful products at Google. And yes, Google Docs is also one of those products with 1 billion users. But we use 1 billion users as a criteria. But we have a lot of products that have 700 million users, 600 million users, and those are massively successful as well. But we just use that 1 billion user as just as a benchmark. Thank you, Shanti Mohan.
Raja, does Professor Raman or JB, you have anything to ask? JB, do you have anything to ask?
Question.
Yeah.
I had a question, Raja. Hi, Gabs. JB here.
Hey, JB.
And hi. And not a single day passes without me using Google Meet, so I'm an avid user.
Thank you.
I have a question. In terms of, you have these traditional so-called innovative companies such as 3M, and they used to have metrics like how many billion-dollar products do we have and so on. So how do you compare yourself with the traditional so-called innovative businesses as compared with Google?
Yeah, traditional innovation companies had an approach like an innovation department, and they said, do they create a billion-dollar product? But at Google, we made the entire company an innovation company. There is no innovation department. And then it also is a very bottom-up approach. In these traditional companies, there is an innovation plan for 1 year, 3 year, 5 year that is laid out top-down, and marching orders are given to the troops. But at Google, actually, it's bottom-up. Anybody can come up with an idea and start building it. And there are a lot of structures put in place. 20% project is just one example. Another example is something called Area 120. So suppose JB, you, me, and Gauss have an idea. We could leave our jobs. Google gives you a set of X $million, and we could sit in an incubation environment and work for the next 3 years on building that idea. Right? It's an idea that we came up with, but if our idea gets approved, we are given that freedom. And then 3 years, they'll leave you alone. And then you go back and report back saying, what happened to your idea, whether it succeeded or not, and whether you created something that millions of users use. So there are a lot of things that Google turned upside down in its formula for innovation. And that has worked extremely well. And one important thing is, the question is never asked, will this go on to create $1 billion product? Eventually, long term, it might be. But in the beginning, have you created something that is used by hundreds of millions of users?
Raja, the student president, Madhav, has a question. Madhav Agarwal has a question.
Yeah, Madhav, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah. Good evening, sir. Pleasure to talk to you. Yes, sir. I had
Gopi,
just
he's the
one
student
doubt.
union president, student council president.
Thank you.
Yes, a pleasure to meet you, sir. Sir, I just had one doubt. For example, you described your journey from McKinsey to Google. So how different was it switching from like a consultancy company to like a software leader like Google? Your roles would have changed a lot. So I just wanted to know about that transformation or shift.
Sure. I mean, it didn't matter which company it came from. Google would have felt vastly different because Google is a very unique beast. I mean, McKinsey is very structured and quite a thoughtful company. It has a long checkered history. And at McKinsey, you work with the CEOs and the boardroom members. It's very formal, right? You are like corporate doctors. But Google, it felt like running away to the sixes. It was a complete, crazy, wild, imaginative environment. It was young. It was optimistic. It was ideological. And people had an attitude of any problem can be solved using technology and data. And let's go to work on big problems. Risk-taking was encouraged. And everything underlying all of that was a deep sense of idealism and hopefulness and optimism that was pretty incredible. And that spirit still continues at Google.
Okay.
Venki Rajendran has a question, Raja.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Venki Rajendran has a question, Raja.
Yeah, before that, before Venki, once again, I think Professor Raman, would you please go ahead, please?
Good morning, Mr. Gopi. Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
Sorry. Yeah, 1 second.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
Number one, how many of our NIT Trichy alumni are there in Google? Number two, when can I expect some alumnus from NIT Trichy to become like the CEO or the head of Google, including your good self?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question. I really don't know how many alumni are here at Google, but I would
do Google search gaps.
Yeah.
Best way to link, to answer the question would be to go probably check on LinkedIn. And then use those two things. But I would expect my estimation it will be probably like a few hundred students between here and the India operations.
I could go next.
Okay, so yeah, that
okay,
Venki
thanks
Rajendran.
and all the best. Thank you.
Venki Rajendran.
Yes, Venki here. Thanks, Gopi, for the profound talk. The last 2 decades have been focused on certain solution patterns, like democratization of information, collective intelligence, and few more, right? What do you think are going to be the themes or solution patterns of the next couple of decades?
Yeah, I'll do that. And before I do that, Venki, Raja, can we make this a last question? I just checked the clock. It's 9:17. I need to go to my next appointment.
Sure. I think this is the last question. Yes, this will be the last question.
Yeah, so the next wave of innovation is primarily going to be around artificial intelligence and supercomputing. And if you haven't seen it, see the excerpts of Sundar's recent interview on BBC where he talks about it. So we expect those to really make the breakthroughs of computing. And there are also some things in life sciences, which is why Google has invested quite a bit in an entire group with Google Health, Verily, Calico, etc. What we can do in the human body. So let me break each one. So artificial intelligence, machine learning, what we can crunch, and the way machines can learn faster than humans and solve problems at scale is already we are seeing the impact of that, but this is going to change very, very dramatically. And the AlphaFold protein folding problem that I talked about is just one tiny example of it. The other thing that you'll begin to see is, if you look at Google Maps, it solved the problem where it accurately predicts when you will arrive at your destination. So if I'm driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles, irrespective of weather and traffic conditions, my Google Map very accurately, to the minute, it seems to be able to tell me exactly when I will arrive. And along the way, if the situation changes, it even adjusts. It might add an extra 4 minutes or so to my journey, etc. We're trying to see in life sciences, for example, we're trying to see, can you solve the same problem with the human body, where you can look at a few markers early on in a person's biometrics and Can you then get computers to predict that at age 45 you would get diabetes, at age 52 you would get a heart attack, etc. Just like you can predict in the case of a car on a geographical map, can you predict that the human body? So lots of breakthrough innovations like that that you can expect to see coming from those fields that I think will represent the next frontier of science, engineering, and research.
But I think, Gopi, just to add to that, including the intrinsic, the new venture that Alphabet floated for robotics.
Yeah.
Gopi, thank you. I have a couple of requests. Okay, if we are going to have another session, if it's going to be possible and practical for all of us, some thoughts about your books and yoga when we talk next, Gopi.
Sure, happy to do it.
Yeah.
And Gopi, maybe offline, Gopi, if you could share some of the books so that we can also put it on our alumni portal. We will do that. I think what are the books I think that you have written?
Forward it to me, Gopi. Just forward it to me. We'll take care.
Forward it to Mali, and we will take care of that. Once again, I think I really thank your time and appreciate your time for sharing pretty good insights on what's happening in the industry and the innovation happening in the industry and also in the digital, transformation. So we look forward to having with you one more session. And till then, I think thanks everyone, all the stuff, the professors, faculties, and the students for being part of the session. We will, until such time, I think we'll meet in the next alumni.
Super Gaps. Thank you, Srirat. Bye. Bye.